Hello, happy Friday to everyone who is in the Friday zone, unless you are ahead of us, like one of our speakers who may be already into Saturday. So welcome to Conscious Conversations. This is the second session in our Muse Brain Health series, and it is so wonderful to see you guys. I see we have already over 250 people joining us from all over the world. I'd love to see where you guys are from. Some from Germany, Toronto, New York, Florida. Fantastic. I love it. Hello, hello, hello to everyone. So my name is Nadia. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm a mindfulness enthusiast and practicer, as well as a senior executive here at Muse. You may notice I am not Patricia Karpus, who was originally supposed to host. She unfortunately couldn't join us today due to a personal circumstance, but she sends her love, especially to all of the Untangle listeners here, which is her podcast that she co-hosts with our co-founder, Ariel, as well as all of our beautiful Muse community members. So here at Muse, we get to work with a remarkable network of people, from meditation teachers to neuroscientists to doctors and clinicians. And with these Conscious Conversations series, we wanted to bring their cutting edge knowledge to help you make actionable changes in your own brain health and lives. For those of you who are new to Muse, though I am going to guess that many of you have heard of Muse on how you got here. We developed state-of-the-art experiences harnessing EEG technology. And really our goal is to help individuals just like you guys to live healthier, happier, and more connected lives through human-centered technology like Muse. Our meditation and sleep tracking headbands and our app offer you brain-powered insights to help you refocus during the day and recover every night. So before we jump into our conversation today we are talking all about brain health and meditation. I wanted to take a second to talk a little bit about what is brain health, right? What do we mean by brain health? To us and to many, a healthy brain means having the ability to function at your best in daily life and work, where you can realize and optimize your cognitive, emotional, psychological, and behavioral functioning to cope with life stress and life situations that are inevitably going to happen. This also includes the ability to comprehend and remember information, to learn new things, to make decisions, to think creatively, to interact with others, and to feel balanced and well. So it is a broad topic, and not necessarily when we think about brain disease states, which is something commonly that people can think of when they think of brain health in a secular way. But really, we're looking at brain health similar to how you would think about your other physical health. And we also know that there are several contributing factors to our brain health, including our genetics and our daily habits. And similar to, as I mentioned, physical health, it's no secret that being active, eating well, getting enough sleep, and managing our stress is very important for the well-being of our brain health. So one thing I was going to ask you guys is, thinking about what I just went through and thinking about that, broader definition of brain health, I'm curious for you guys who have joined us today, what is one thing that you do to look after your brain health? I'm going to guess there might be a lot of meditation in there, but if there's something different that you do and you wanted to share, I would love to see what comes up. And I see neurofeedback, of course, meditation, sleep, music. Oh, I love music. Sobriety, running, yoga, avoiding breathe out there. You guys are chatting so fast that it's going through. Art, learning a new language, self-compassion journaling, weightlifting, supplements, walking the dog in the woods. Oh my gosh, I love these. These are awesome. Yes, massage, puzzles, biking, therapy. Oh man, you guys are my heroes. I love this. This is great. So in today's session, we are specifically going to focus on the pillar of meditation and mindfulness and the role they play in brain health. So at this time, I'm going to introduce you guys to our two speakers who will be joining us today. So we have Shannon Harvey and Dr. Ron Siegel. I'm super excited to have you guys with us. So Shannon is a multi-award-winning director of two internationally acclaimed documentaries, The Connection, Mind Your Body, and My Year of Living Mindfully. So her first book, The Whole Health Life, is about finding good health after being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. As a journalist, she spent many years working for leading news organizations such as the ABC and Fairfax. She's also the recipient of the National Press Club of Australia's Health Journalist of the Year Award and produces a popular blog and podcast while trying to balance her life as a mother of two adventurous boys. Shannon, super happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
We also have Dr. Ron Siegel, who is a psychology professor at Harvard Medical School, where he has taught for over 35 years. He is a longtime student of mindfulness meditation and serves on the board of directors and faculty of the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy. He teaches internationally about the application of mindfulness practice in psychotherapy and other fields, and maintains a private clinical practice in Massachusetts. Ron has written numerous books, including The Mindfulness Solution, Everyday Practices for Everyday Problems, that describes how to develop a mindfulness practice for anxiety, depression, and parenting. Ron is also co-developing an exciting new course with us here at Muse that is aimed at helping individuals transform their chronic pain with the power of mindfulness. So Ron, super, super happy to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So I wanted to start our discussion off today. We talked a little bit about what I went through and kind of described as a definition for brain health. But I wanted to dig in a little bit about what is your definition of meditation and the difference of meditation and mindfulness. So Shannon or Ron, up to you. Who would love to go first?
I'd like to hear Ron's definition.
Well, this question, I'm happy to. I do a lot of training of mental health professionals in how to use mindfulness practices to help clients or patients. And this question comes up quite a bit. The way I understand it, meditation is a rather broad category that applies to all different kinds of brain and heart or emotional training. Christian contemplative prayer, for example, is a form of meditation where one might focus on a bit of liturgy and stay with that and see what it means to oneself. Mindfulness, on the other hand, is actually an attitude toward experience. It's about, in some way, being aware of present experience with loving acceptance. There are various definitions, but they all come down to variance on that. So mindfulness is really an attitude toward experience that might have nothing to do with meditation. In other words, one could be mindful walking the dog. One could be mindful hugging a child. However, when we try to cultivate mindfulness, we usually do it through meditative practices. And those meditative practices mean deliberate heart and mind training designed to develop mindfulness. So these are two overlapping Venn diagrams, if you will. Lots of forms of meditation, only some forms of meditation are actually mindfulness meditation. Lots of ways we might be mindful, but one way to cultivate mindfulness is through mindfulness meditation.
Love that.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I spent an entire year interviewing many people like Ron and his colleagues who all come at this definition in many different ways, and it can be quite confusing if you're not, if you don't have a PhD in psychotherapy to actually understand what we're talking about when we're talking about mindfulness. And one thing that I really like doing is using analogies. And I noticed everybody was kind of in the chat was talking about all the different things that they do to keep, for their brain health. And there were people who were into tennis, and there were other people who were into rock climbing or weightlifting. And I think one thing that really helped me was realizing that the word meditation can be a little bit like the word exercise, in that you might be doing something like visualization as a meditation, but then there's also this thing that we're talking about in some ways, which is mindfulness training. So in some ways, I sort of think of mindfulness training as a little bit like a specific form of exercise, or a specific form of meditation. And the other thing that I think might be helpful as well is, after sort of digesting all the different definitions that all the experts like Ron gave me, I when I actually started practicing mindfulness training, I started thinking of it as training in order to hear myself think. So having that ability, training that ability to actually sit back and listen deeply to whatever is happening in my mind, and then as I got more experienced, in my wider experience as well.
I love that. And actually, you're introducing a great topic, which is really metacognition. And what does that mean? And how is that helpful? Ron, I'd love actually to hear you talk a little bit about what is metacognition, and how does mindfulness help us cultivate that, and why is it useful?
Interestingly, the name of our species is Homo sapiens sapiens, which is, roughly translates to the human that is aware that he or she is aware, or that they are aware. And metacognition is really this ability to notice what the mind is doing, but not necessarily to identify with its contents. Put simply, and for the kind of thing that plagues us all, if I'm in a funk and I'm thinking, gosh, I'm really not doing very well in my life, I'm really failing at things, I'm really not very adequate. Regular cognition would be thinking those thoughts, in other words, having those words pass through our minds and believing that they're representing reality in some way and feeling horrible about it. Metacognition would be noticing that, oh, there's a depressive thought again. Oh, there's a happy thought again. Oh, there's an impulse to do that. Oh, there's a desire to do something else. Metacognition is really this capacity that we have as humans, which is probably unique to us as a species, to be able to actually see what the heart and mind are doing, and to be able to, in some way, witness that and not necessarily believe in it, nor be so reactive to it. And this is enormously powerful for us, because if I can just ask, all of our viewers at the moment, think of something that bothers you. Shouldn't take you long. Don't pick the worst thing ever, but just something that's disturbing you right now, in your life. Here and now, if it weren't for the thought of the thing, would you be having a problem? And chances are the answer is no, not really. Even if you're in physical pain here and now, it's probably the thought that it's going to persist or get worse, or you're not going to be able to fix it, that's most disturbing. So what we start to see when we develop metacognitive awareness is virtually all of our suffering is predicated on having a thought and believing in that thought. So if we can develop this capacity to see thoughts as thoughts, there's tremendous potential for psychological freedom.
Wow. And I mean, on the one hand, I love that response. Thank you, Ron. Shannon, you kind of led into this. You started your own mindfulness journey and you really hit the ground running. I'd love to know, what was it like for you to meet your mind, to meet yourself in that way for the first time? Because I think for a lot of us, when we start a practice, and metacognition and this understanding of seeing our own thoughts that way, it's very different, and it's almost meeting yourself in a new way. So I'd kind of love for you to bring us through what that was like for you, and also what inspired you to start your journey.
So just to kind of pick up on where Ron finished, another way that I like to think about this is that in the same way that we teach young children not to believe everything they first hear, I feel like the mindfulness training is still about learning not to believe everything I think and feel.
Mm.
And the word I like that is help is sort of sounds a little bit less scientific is decentering, that many of the academics are all using as well, like this ability to kind of step back. But to answer your direct question about what was it like to meet my mind, at the beginning, it was horrendous. My relationship to my own mind was, and in many ways, you know, it's an ongoing journey for me. I've been meditating now for well over 1,300 days in a row, and I
Which,
initially
like, a
started
small
meditating.
round of applause. That's incredible.
So my initial commitment was just to stick to a year, and I still feel like I'm a beginner. You know, I still have so much to learn, and it's an evolving process. But I know that we'll talk about this as we progress, but in addition to meeting my mind and the contents of my mind, you know, I since I was a teenager, I've suffered from insomnia, and my mind would just get caught up in those endless loops. And I'd 1 or 2 nights a week, I'd go through the night unable to sleep. But in addition to that, I also had a lot of chronic pain because I have an autoimmune disease, which from time to time flares up and causes arthritis. And even just the act of sitting, you know, for extended periods of time, there's a sort of a build up of pain, which was, particularly when I first started, something that I thought was intolerable. And I think this community will be able to relate. My relationship to that has significantly changed now. Yeah.
That's incredible. So you kind of had these, you know, personal afflictions that I guess started you to open the door towards wanting to look for alternative solutions for coping and moving through and working well. And obviously now you have gone on quite a streak past your year. What I'm curious was a turning point for you. What was your first milestone as you started your journey? And you mentioned, you know, it was quite horrendous at first.
Mhm.
When did it start to get a little bit better? And how did you kind of notice that shift?
There were a number of really big breakthroughs, and it kind of all progresses. I started using an app, and I committed to meditating for 20 minutes a day, and that brought some kind of fundamental questions about my mind and goodness me, what is this? And then I progressed and signed up to an 8-week course, and started committing as part of that course to 45 minutes a day with a teacher. And the teacher really, it was like having a personal trainer for my mind. So it like being able to speak with somebody who was very wise, and sort of tweak my techniques was quite transformative. And also I think that there was a really palpable difference between meditating, for me personally, between 20 minutes and going up to 45 minutes. And then over time, you know, again, to use this sports analogy, I felt like I had done training, and that I was ready to take on a 10-day silent retreat. And the retreat itself was, aside from marrying my husband and having my 2 gorgeous kids, that retreat was the best thing I've ever done in my entire life.
The 10-day retreat. Okay.
Yeah. It was like all that, you know, ruminating on my past, all the thinking about my future, all that kind of, you know, 1,000 million times a day telling stories to myself, through this, you know, training and dedicated guidance from an excellent teacher. It's like all of that finally, for the first time in my life, fell away, and I was able to experience these moments of deep abiding inner peace. And I use the word moments because it doesn't last. But having that kind of level of insight, it's something that I'd been looking for my whole life, and it was really, really amazing. And it still is. I still try to get to a couple of retreats a year now. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. And Go ahead, Ron.
One thing, Shannon, that you're pointing out is that these practices are very dose related, right? That doing, 10 minutes
Dose-related.
a day or 20 minutes a day is an entirely different experience than meditating 45 minutes a day. And going on a silent retreat for a week or more is a completely different experience. And while they're not for everybody, because they can be quite destabilizing, and we now have a pretty good literature on the adverse effects of mindfulness practices that we should not ignore, because what happens on intensive retreats in particular is people wind up connecting with thoughts and feelings that they may have pushed out of their awareness for years or decades. And if they don't have a sufficient holding and a good structure around them, that can be too much. So I don't want to, I feel a certain responsibility not to say, oh, everybody should do this. But if with the guidance of a teacher, you decide to do that, it is it's a whole other level of understanding the potential of these practices, the potential of these practices to really step out of the thought stream and to experience a different way of being, and to really see clearly how we make ourselves miserable. Because the fundamental insight that comes on a retreat is our external environment is pretty stable, food's taken care of, shelter's taken care of, everything's okay. And yet one moment the mind interprets it as, this is the most wonderful thing ever. I need to quit my job. I need to become a monk. I need to just meditate all the time so I can be in this space, because this is what a human being is designed to be. I've never been the same in my life. 3 hours later, this is so goddamn boring. How many days did I sign up for? I got to check my email. I got to check my email. And to see the mind cycle through these different states, and to understand that, to see, obviously, nothing has changed externally. Most of the times when we're miserable or we're happy, we think it's because we had good fortune or bad fortune. What you learn on a retreat is, oh no, the mind cycles through these things, even holding the external environment, quite constant. And, we learn firsthand this wonderful saying that comes out of Tibetan tradition, which is that looking for lasting satisfaction by arranging our life to be just so is a lot like looking for sunshine in a north-facing cave. It simply doesn't work that way, but it's about how we change our relationship to experience winds up being what's, potentially transformative.
I love that. And Ron, I had this as a note to talk about a little bit later, but it seems so pertinent to talk about now. You kind of mentioned that there are a tendency for us sometimes to create almost these negative thought patterns that we can drill down on if we're not being careful, and maybe even create distorted thinking at certain periods of times. I believe, do you refer to it as anxious awareness?
I don't know that I use that phrase. What cognitive scientists discuss when talking about this is the negativity bias in the mind. If you think of the brain evolved for survival. And if you could imagine, our ancestor, Lucy, living 4.5 million years ago in the African savannah, she could have made one of two types of errors. She could have looked at some ambiguous beige shape behind some bushes and gone, oh my God, it's a lion, when it was really just a beige rock. Or she could have said, probably a beige rock, when it was really a lion. Now, she could make countless of those first types of errors, which, if there are any scientists among us, correspond to type 1 errors in scientific research, and she would still live to tell. One type 2 error, that would be the end of her DNA line. So we might imagine that there were happy hominids holding hands, singing Kumbaya, telling stories about dynamite sexual encounters and luscious pieces of fruit back in the day. They may have had a very lovely life. They were not our ancestors. Why? Because statistically, they died before they got to reproduce. Our ancestors were the ones wandering around the savannah going, oh my God, it's a lion, another poisonous plant. Oh no, that venomous snake. Remember what happened to Uncle Charlie? Those were our ancestors. And that's the negativity bias that we see in our brain. All you have to, let's say you've got a job and you had a performance review and your boss told you about 9 things that you're doing a dynamite job at, but one area needs improvement. What are you thinking about at 3 a.m? This is simply the mind's tendency. My friend Rick Hansen says it's like Velcro for bad experiences and Teflon for good ones. Bad things happen, they stick, we ruminate on them, they occupy our minds. The good ones, slide right off the pan after a few moments. So this is one of the reasons why it's so vital to begin to notice that, oh, we don't have to actually believe in all these thoughts. In fact, we don't even have to live in a world which is simply the us talking to ourselves about ourselves all day long, which is basically what we know in, from cognitive science and neurobiology. That's our default mode. That's what we do. I talk to Ron about Ron all day long. And when we start to practice mindfulness, we have a chance of having some perspective on that. And it's vitally important because in aggregate, our thoughts are not all that happy. An awful lot of our thoughts are worrying about the future or thinking about something, bad that happened in the past.
Yeah, I mean, outside of stress, obviously, and chronic stress, and thank goodness we're not living in the time of snakes and terror and lions. But yeah, we have chronic low-grade stress all the time. And
well, we're reactive, so we
yeah,
are living in that world. It's just
because it feels the same. Yeah.
Most of the time, instead of snakes or lions, we're afraid that somebody's not going to like our post on social media.
Same emotional and physical response, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And one of the things that you guys also bring up, which is interesting, is really this connection of mind and body. And something that you both have in common is this connection to pain. And I find pain very interesting also because, and Ron, I'm super keen for you to dig into this, it is so deeply connected to our mind's perception of pain and then how that is inferred into physical pain. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how pain is a perfect example that exemplifies the very, very powerful connection between mind and body.
Yeah, I mean, I can do this, and perhaps Shannon, you'd like to talk from your personal experience about this as well. What we know is that it used to be believed, if you go all the way back to Rene Descartes, right, in hundreds of years ago, he believed, and everybody believed, that pain was like a rope pulling on a bell, like as though you hurt your finger, the nerves are a bit of a rope, the signal reaches the brain, and we experience pain. It actually started in World War II. There was a wonderful military surgeon named Harry Beecher who noticed that he was evacuating soldiers off of the battlefield who were in terrible states of disrepair. They weren't in shock. And when he would offer them morphine, they said, don't bother. And he said, what's this like? When he was in his civilian practice, people would have a very clean surgical incision and they'd be screaming for morphine. And he started to notice there's a difference here. Well, the fact that the soldiers were so relieved to be carried off the battlefield made them not care that much about the pain, whereas the civilian folks were all anxious about the surgery they had just had. Fast forward, a few decades, and what we know is that pain is powerfully influenced and amplified by anxiety. And this happens in two ways. One is simply the same pain sensation with anxiety mixed in will be experienced as more intense. You can put somebody's hand in ice water, tell them, I'm going to ask you to hold it in ice water for about 30 seconds. And you ask them after 15 seconds to rate their pain, and they'll say, it's a 2 on a scale of 10. Set up the exact same experiment, only say, I'm going to ask you to keep your hand in the ice water for 10 minutes. And after 15 seconds, they'll say, I'm not doing that. I can't stand it. It's already a 7 or an 8. Just having the fear that the pain will be unremitting amplifies the actual sensation of the pain. There's another component. An awful lot of pain that we have is exacerbated by muscles tightening up. A lot of pain is musculoskeletal that we have. Even if it's pain around an injury, we brace and we guard and we contract muscles, and contracted muscles hurt a lot. So that will also amplify pain. And of course, when we're frightened, we contract our muscles. So the combination of these two processes means that if we approach pain with fear, resistance, aversion, and constriction, we're gonna suffer a lot more. If, on the other hand, we can train the mind and train our emotional system to open to pain and to simply see it as a changing object in the ever-changing field of sensations, that's going to make it an awful lot easier to deal with it. And in fact, in the case of some forms of musculoskeletal pain, that may resolve it entirely, because some forms of musculoskeletal pain are simply caused by being so frightened of the pain. We're so contracted, the contractions cause the muscles to tighten, the tightened muscles hurt, and we can get stuck in the loop when actually nothing's even broken in the body. But so for these reasons, mindfulness practice becomes enormously useful for working with pain, because it can interrupt this whole aversion response to the pain and teach us to open to it and be with it in a whole different way. I don't know, Shannon, if that was part of your experience in dealing with your pain as you took up the practices.
Yeah, definitely. This the pain doesn't change, but my relationship to the pain is what changes. And I can remember when I went on my first retreat, my first ever retreat, there were these people who sat at the front the entire retreat, and they were like rocks. And I was like, how can they do that? You know, we're sitting for 10, 12, however many hours a day. And I'm like, that's amazing. You know, just because I don't know if people in the audience have ever tried to sit, you know, for 2 hours at a time, but it's really difficult to do without moving. Like the body just wants to move. And I recently went on a retreat, and at the very, very end, you know, after we'd broken silence, somebody came up to me and said, I can't believe how still you were. And I was like, whoa, really? Like that's, you know, and I attribute that to the training itself, to the, you know, it is sitting, the word I use to describe this is discomfortable. Comfortable, perfectly comfortable, despite the fact that I am in discomfort. And it's like, you know, I can be experiencing pain as a sensation, but I'm not experiencing all that emotional turmoil that comes with it. So, yeah.
You know, I can share another example of this that actually comes from my daughter, who always had a lot of resistance to hot, humid weather, and would complain to such a degree that when I have twin daughters, and when the kids were little, we wouldn't go on a vacation to somewhere hot and humid. It just wasn't worth it. And, you know, here I am, Dr. Mindfulness. So, you know, for years, I'm saying to her, you know, you might just bring your attention to the sensations of the sweat, bring your attention to the sensations of the stickiness, just feel it. It's just, see if you can just feel it. It's just a bunch of sensations. At one point around age 11, she, for one reason, I don't know why, but suddenly it made sense to her. And she tried just sweating when she was hot, just feeling the perspiration and noticing that it was a set of sensations. You know, she later went on to study Arabic and lived in Cairo for a year, including in Cairo, which is like, if you can handle that, you can handle heat and humidity. And she was okay. So it just speaking to this, that it really is possible to change our relationship to discomfort, exactly as Shannon was saying, and that transforms the whole ballgame.
And there's another important ingredient here, I feel, that you both may be able to speak to, which is the art of self-compassion in dealing with this discomfort. I know, Ron, you speak about this actually in the course that we were co-developing. Would you be able to speak a little bit about how you've experienced this personally and how mindfulness practice develops this self-compassion?
Sure. You know, a lot of times when things go wrong in our life, we react with a set of responses that are not very helpful at all. This actually comes from friends and colleagues of mine. Chris Germer and Kristen Neff developed a mindful self-compassion program, and they've outlined this quite nicely, that we wind up first being very, very critical toward ourselves, right? We also tend to withdraw from the world when we're when things have gone wrong, because we feel terrible about ourselves, and in so doing, we rob ourselves of the possibility of feeling it's okay, sweetheart. You know, we talk to ourselves when we've done something, when things have gone wrong, in a way we would never talk to our friends, right? You idiot. Why did you do that? that was dumb. The things we say to ourselves, we'd never have any friends, but we have no trouble at all talking to ourselves in this way. And every time we're self-critical, yes, we think it's going to work to beat us into shape and, get us next time we're going to really buckle down and be disciplined appropriately if we're mean enough to ourselves. But the research says it doesn't work. What works much more effectively is finding a way to treat ourselves as we would treat a good friend under these circumstances. So, let's say I messed up on something, I forgot something, I did what I felt was a poor job, and I'm starting to be all down on myself. What would a friend of mine say? They'd say, oh gosh, we all make mistakes. Oh, you should have seen what I did at the presentation last week. I completely forgot my theme and went all off. Or just now in this moment, I thought, oh God, I've forgotten Chris and Kristen's 3 items for a moment. I just said 3 items, I only said 2. I could start beating myself up about that. I could get into a tangle about it, or I could decide, it's okay, sweetheart. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. And it's interesting, as soon as we're kind to ourselves in this way, again, if we look at these 2 basic postures, we move from this constricted posture, right? This posture of no, denial, fighting, to this kind of posture. And it's so transformative. Our viewers can do this right now. I love this little experiment. Just make 2 fists, okay? And let's all do this. And make 2 fists and, think of an angry thought. Let yourself be angry and critical. If you're a nice person and can't do that easily, just think of somebody in the other political party and think of what you'd like to say to them. And make these fists being angry and critical, and then just do this physically, if you can see what I'm doing. And notice what happens to the experience. Notice how the whole constellation, the whole mind-body approach of aversion and negativity transforms into some kind of acceptance. Self-compassion is an important part of that. That's why, when my colleagues and I first, many years ago, started writing about how to integrate mindfulness practices into psychotherapy, the definition was awareness of present experience with acceptance. That seemed to be the best definition. Now, I think a much better definition is awareness of present experience with loving acceptance. It's about actually infusing it with warmth, with love, so that we can treat ourselves as a loving parent or a loving friend would treat us. And it's interesting, as people have deconstructed mindfulness to its various elements to see which have which kinds of therapeutic effects. There's been now decades of research on this, and probably the most therapeutic element in mindfulness is not developing some laser focused ability to stay with the breath or even to sit still, although admirable that you could sit still, Shannon, in an intensive retreat. It's being able to accept what's happening, being able to accept ourselves, warts and all, foibles and all, mistakes and all. That capacity seems to be what's most healing to us.
And
during the my year of living mindfully, I met Kristen. She came to Australia just when I was about halfway through the project. And what was really interesting is that at that time, I took her self-compassion scale. So I'd been meditating every day for, I think it was about 6 months at that point. And on the scale, I rated quite high for my mindfulness, but I rated really, really below average for my self-compassion. And what I think is so interesting about that is you're like just listening to you talking about your journey, about how you've tweaked the definition of mindfulness and the practice, is that I think one thing that we can get a little bit lost with this practice, or certainly I was when I was, very much a beginner, is that we can just talk about the sitting back and the decentering and the being aware of. But there's this extra element that I think you're talking about there, which is the generative practice side of it. It's like there's the awareness piece, and that's really important. But then it's what we do with the awareness once it's there. So then after I sort of realized that I was so low on the self-compassion, I started deliberately practicing and bringing in some of Kristen's techniques into my own practice. And then quite quickly, there was a really noticeable result. And I took the scale again at the end of the year. and boom, straight back up there again. So yeah, it's certainly very interesting, isn't it?
And it's also interesting that in many of the Asian traditions from which a lot of the mindfulness practices we teach in the West derive, the phrase is more heartfulness than mindfulness.
Heartfulness.
It is about warmth, compassion, and acceptance with awareness. These things aren't so separable. And we saw for decades. I mean, I've been really. If you think you're a beginner, Shannon, I started when I was 17, and I'm like a slow student. Trust me. If you were to look at my mind, and interestingly, earlier, decades ago, there was much more of an emphasis on bearing down and really getting focused, and jhana practices and really getting concentration going. And it became apparent that people were beating themselves up on the cushion, and everybody was sitting thinking everybody else is a better meditator than me, that it really wasn't that helpful. And it's only in somewhat more recent years that in general, teachers have been emphasizing the kindness to oneself. When you're talking earlier about when Nadia, you asked Shannon the question about what she discovered about her mind, I thought of a quote, and I'd like to just share it with you. It's a wonderful quote from the Buddhist monk Bhante Guanarantana, who's written a very nice book, Mindfulness in Plain English. Here's what he says. I think this is very good for developing self-compassion. Somewhere in this process, you will come face to face with the sudden and shocking realization that you are completely crazy. Your mind is a shrieking, gibbering madhouse on wheels, barreling pell-mell down the hill, utterly out of control and hopeless. No problem. You are not crazier than you were yesterday. It has always been this way, and you just never noticed. You are also no crazier than everybody else around you. And
I love that.
I find his observation there really useful for being kind to ourselves when we're learning to meditate and discovering, oh my God, it's a madhouse in there.
I love that. And I do love, I love, Ron, this idea of really just referring to how would you talk to a friend? When you take that small moment and say, you'd never talk to a friend or a family member or colleague the way that you talk to yourself, I find that that's often a jarring moment for myself as well, to kind of hear that negative self-talk and reflect and say, whoa, why am I saying that to myself when I would never say that to a colleague or friend? So thank you for that in that passage. We have 15 minutes left, and I know that we have quite a few questions coming in. Before we get to the questions, I did just want to do one poll with the audience, because I love the fact that you guys both spoke to dose-dependent meditation. So audience, question for you. I would love to know, how frequently are you guys meditating right now? And while that poll is getting loaded up, I would love for Ron and Shannon, you guys to give us your quick tips on what you recommend for someone who maybe has dabbled in meditation, but they have not stuck to a consistent practice. What would be a nice little training routine as far as an easy way to get started when it comes to dosing their meditation?
Shannon,
Okay,
go for it.
So as a health journalist who, enjoys taking peer-reviewed academic papers to bed with me because I find them fascinating, I came at this from a very scientific perspective, because I knew that my biggest problem was going to be actually sticking with it when I first decided that I would meditate every day for a year. So I used behavior change theory and I applied it to my own life. And so I'll just share 3 really quick tips. The first one is not based on any behavior change theory. I stumbled on it by accident. And that is that it was a recording of one of my favorite meditation teachers of a talk that he gave on a retreat. And it accidentally defaulted to my alarm clock one morning. And so now every morning, my favorite meditation teacher wakes me up with a talk, and he says, now, we're going to talk about mindfulness, and we're going to go right back to the very, very beginning. And
that's great.
just his voice reminding me about mindfulness. It's the first thing I think about consciously when I wake up in the morning. And so I'm reminded of my intention to practice. And it was awesome finding that out. The second tip is having a commitment contract. So I cottoned onto this from one of my favorite health journalists, who's an American named AJ Jacobs, who's a hilarious writer. And he wrote a great book called Drop Dead Healthy. And he couldn't quit eating dried mangoes. So he made a commitment contract with himself where he wrote a check to the American Nazi Party, and he made his wife promise to mail the check if he ever ate another slice of drink. Now, I'm not saying that you would want to do that, but for me, when I committed to my year of living mindfully, I recruited an entire team of scientists. I had 3 neuroscientists, people studying my gene expression, my cellular aging, my, subjective well-being, the whole lot. And if I didn't stick to the practice, then the whole experiment would be pointless. So that was my commitment contract. Yours obviously wouldn't need to be as elaborate as that, but I think actually having something that's going to hold you to account really helps, especially in the beginning. And the final tip I've got is using a behavior change technique called if-then planning, which was developed by Peter Gollwitzer from New York University. And it's been shown to be extremely effective in helping people obtain their health goals. And my if-then planning technique goes like this. If it is 6 a.m. in the morning, then I will meditate in my living room for 45 minutes. If my 2 young children or one of my children wakes up early and I'm unable to meditate, then I will meditate at work in our meeting room for 45 minutes at lunchtime. And it goes on and on and on and on, right through to my weekend, where it's like, if it's the weekend and I don't have any time to meditate because I've got soccer with the kids and I've got lunch with the family and whatever, then I will meditate at 3 p.m. when my 4-year-old son has his afternoon rest. And so by having this if-then planning technique, what it does is it allows me to plan for the fact that I will inevitably slip up, because I'm a human being and I have a busy life. And I guarantee you that if not for that technique, I would not have actually been able to follow through, because I would have just fallen out of the habit so easily. I have, like many people, I have a really busy life, and it's just so easy to kind of forget my well-intended health goals. So I hope that people who are trying to stick with the practice.
It's buffering for life, Ron.
So I would suggest 2 that overlap and one that's a little different. The overlapping ones with what Shannon was saying are, first, have reminders around. She's got it coming out of her alarm clock, just having a little Post-it somewhere, having books by meditation teachers around. These kinds of things support us. The second one, which is related to the kind of commitment that Shannon was talking about, is human connections. We show up for meetings with friends because most of us care about our connections and care about maintaining relationships. Having a meditation buddy, somebody who is also trying to do this, and where once or twice a week you're going to check in and see how it went. Ideally, if you live near each other and you can do it, or even set up a Zoom connection, meditate together at the same time. Joining a class that meets at certain times. We show up for classes that we're part of. We just, as human beings, we're much better at showing up for other people than we are at showing up for ourselves. So that would be something that I would suggest. Make there be a social connection as part of it. The part which is a little bit different, but also comes from another body of behavior change literature, is when we remind ourselves of what our basic values are, what matters to us, we tend to behave in ways that are consistent with those values. So just asking yourself, each day or every other day, what actually matters to me? And it might be things like being a good mom or being a good dad or son or daughter. It might be things like, being a generous and healthy and alive human being. It could be whatever. If you're in a religious tradition, it might be living up to the ideals of that. Simply reminding yourself that matters, since it turns out that mindfulness practice is such a good support for being able to be the kind of person we want to be. It helps us not to act compulsively on our addictions. It helps us not to yell and scream and do all the stuff we do when we're overwhelmed. It helps us to be able to tolerate discomfort so that we can make wise and compassionate decisions. It tends to support whatever our values are. So just reminding ourselves of what we're trying to do in this life as a human being can help us, can help support the practice as well.
I love that. I love that. And okay, we are running out of time really fast. Madison was supposed to get questions going. We have the poll here. Wow, the majority of you guys are meditating daily, 44%, with after that 25% doing it 3 to 5 times a week. That is fantastic. You guys are crushing me. I am a once a week to sometimes 3 times a week if I get to it, and it's on my goal list to try to get a little bit more regular. I have a couple questions that I'd love to ask Madison. I'm just going to pick a couple so you don't need to worry about coming on. One of them is my most favorite. And we'll try to, I'm going to challenge our speakers to stay concise on these, but they're going to be complex questions, so this will be challenging. From Paul, he asks, how do I not chase the birds? So just a reminder for those in Muse, when you use the Muse headband for biofeedback, when you are able to maintain sustained focus for at least 5 seconds, you're rewarded with the sounds of birds chirping. Naturally, this brings up thoughts of judgment, of I'm doing good, or, oh, I've got some birds. And then quickly, the birds can be scared away. So I'm curious, Ron or Shannon, whoever would like to answer, what's one tip for not chasing the birds, if you will?
Well, I would just say briefly, one of the nice things about the Muse headband design is when you chase the birds, they fly away. We learn through trial and error. And when we see repeatedly that every time we get constricted or, get hooked by our desire to, oh, I want to have a clear, calm moment. Oh, I want to have the mind like I had on retreat that day. Oh, I want to have that. We notice that every time we try to cling to a particular state, it evaporates. It's like trying to get to sleep, or for that matter, trying to get an erection. We learned from experience that these ways of approaching experience just don't work so well. So you actually learn by chasing the birds a lot, seeing it failing a lot, and gradually getting it that, oh, no, that's not what this is about. This is about settling back and accepting whatever arises.
Love it. Maybe Shannon, I'll do this next one for you, which is also relevant to the Muse experience, because one of the things that can be a curse and a blessing of using Muse is this idea of progress, of this idea of progressing and trying to reach your goals, moving forward in your practice. And naturally, when you do that with Muse, there are certain elements of the device that can give you feedback, like birds or like a calm score, for example. But when you think about progress in your meditation practice, what does that look like, and how do you define that, Shannon?
And how long have I got? A minute.
You've got like three or 4 minutes. Yeah, it's okay.
I mean, for me, the biggest measure was the fact that I haven't had insomnia in years now.
Wow. That's a lot of progress.
So that's progress, I think. That's very tangible. That's very real. And I didn't need 3 neuroscientists to tell me that, mindfulness training is the reason that I now know I no longer suffer from insomnia. So I think that's progress. And that's very tangible and experiential. So, because I'm not familiar with Muse, I can't comment specifically on the kind of the goal attainment aspect, the gamification aspect of it. So I can't quite help with that particular problem.
But that question points to a very basic paradox in mindfulness practice, which is, how can you both be putting in effort to not be so effortful? How can we be putting in effort to accept what's happening? And we run into that paradox repeatedly as we get involved in the practice. And it's something that you can only get a feel for, that, oh no, it's about yes, trying, but also letting go, or as Yoda said, try, no try. It's there is a very basic paradox in here that bit by bit over years, frankly, of practice, we get to see how striving and seeking progress is actually very often counterproductive.
Yes, it can. But in this, yeah, it's that's one of my favorite topics personally, because I'm a very goal-oriented person. So it's this whole labeling, and I'd love to dig into more of kind of that non-judgment portion of it. But unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time today together. I had such an incredible time listening to both of you and your expertise and the amazing learnings that you've been able to share with us today. Thank you guys, everybody in the audience. Thank you all for joining our session today and sending through your thoughtful questions and your comments and just being present with us. We'll be setting up a discussion group in our Muse community to address any of the questions that we didn't get to today. And you'll also get an email next week with all of the details, as well as a copy of this recording and a special offer from Muse to you. So thank you, our speakers, Ron and Shannon. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're so grateful. And I hope everyone has an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.